Hi and hello, everyone. Welcome back to the PMP exam preparation course. So let's quickly jump in to topics. So knowledge management areas, the project integration management, and project scope management. Let's get started. Project integration management. The project integration management, as the name says, it deals with consolidation of different activities and all those activities which are interlinked to one another are to be identified and gathered at one place to make a bigger sense. So this is the only knowledge area in all the 10 other knowledge areas which has at least one activity in all 5 process groups, right? So all other 9 knowledge areas, they don't have at least one process in all the process groups. So let's see what the processes are, and we'll get to learn each one of them. So the first thing is developing the project charter. A charter is a formal letter which allows the project manager to start the project activities. So secondly, we'll talk about developing the project managing plan. It refers to the integrated project management plan, which is a consolidation of all other planning processes. And directing and managing the project work, this is from the execution group actually, and it's all about work performance. Managing project knowledge, we have knowledge and experience from the past, so how to convert and use it to further create new knowledge which will help the project, right? So this topic is all about that. Monitoring and controlling of the project work, this refers to the methods of reviewing and reporting. Perform integrated change control, this is all about gathering all the change requests and approving the ones that are possible. Finally, the close project or phase, so all the finalizing activities are covered here. Before we move ahead to the explanation of the processes, it is important for us to understand what are ITTOs. Each and every process that we are going to learn going to have the ITTOs. And what is ITTO? They are nothing but inputs, tools, and techniques, and finally the outputs. Every process that we are going to learn is going to have these 3 steps. Process 1, ITTOs, process 2, ITTOs, so on and so forth. So you should study every process in this flow only, which will be very easier. So like, what are my inputs, what tools I should apply, and what will be the output of my process. Now, if we study this way, you will easily remember all the 49 processes. Now, I keep repeating this enough that you should be learning all the 49 processes by heart, but I do not mean that you have to learn all the ITTOs as well. So you have to remember the processes, but not the ITTOs. But the importance is to be given about what happens to each process. So learn each process ITTOs, but you don't need to learn it by heart. Okay, we can jump in. The first process, developing the project charter. Before I start on the explanation, let me quickly brief you about how we are going to learn all these 49 processes. So as a project manager, you must be always aware of what is the target outcome for which you are doing anything that you're doing. Like, you must have a clear vision about what my actions are going to result in when I'm done with a set of activities. I prefer we should do this not just for the project management, but for every other thing that we do. Here, I have 3 key points that you should learn in each and every process. So the inputs, the tools and techniques, and the outputs. If you start learning these processes in that same sequence of inputs and then the tools and then the outputs, you won't be able to visualize what you're working for. So, for example, in this very process, if you start studying for this process by learning what are the inputs first, and then the tools and then the outputs, we cannot keep up the motivation, right? So, my suggestion to you is to start understanding the outputs first, right? Not the inputs. Learn what your goal is first, and then understand what inputs I have to, I have to achieve those outputs, and then look at the tools and techniques that you need to convert these inputs to outputs. I hope it's clear to you. I didn't confuse you. So you'll understand this method as I start explaining each process. So let's begin. Developing the project charter. The 2 main goals of this process are the project charter and the assumptions log. Let's understand these terms. The documents which authorizes the project manager to start the project is called the project charter. This can just be a single document for which the whole project, or if some project is too huge to be declared at once, the charter sometimes is also authorized in in phase wise. So phase 1 has a separate charter, phase 2 has a separate. charter. So remember one thing, this is needed to be developed by project manager, of course, but it cannot be authorized by the project manager. So there is a difference here. It will be authorized by the project manager's boss. So it's usually the higher management, the project sponsor who sponsors the project. He's the one who authorizes it. But the project manager has to still support in gathering the data. So we don't have to focus on what our format is going to be for this project charter, because every organization has their own set formats. So just know what a project charter is, and that's enough. And what about the assumptions log? What is an assumptions log? As the name suggests, this is nothing but a list of considerations that had not yet been proven yet, right? But they are necessary for the project to succeed. Now, let's take an example for testing a component. So for testing a component, we assume that there will be new testing machine installed. So we assume a new person will be hired to test this part, or an existing expertise will be used. So all these assumptions come under assumptions log. So what do we need to achieve these outputs? The project manager has to support these documents by providing a business case information to the approving committee. So like what is the demand, the organizational needs, social needs, so on and so forth. This business case is one such business document. That is an input. When we speak about agreements, this is something that is very, very important. Usually, any organization will work with a lot of vendors, and third-party organizations. From all such parties that are involved within and outside the corporation, there has to be an agreement of the work signed. So this will serve as a legal document later. You must have heard about the MOUs, the Memorandum of Understandings, the Letter of Intents, the NDAs, the Non-Disclosure Agreements. All of these are examples of agreements. These act as inputs for developing the project charter. And then enterprise environmental factors, organizational process assets. This topic is also touched upon. This is nothing but to follow all the rules, regulations, the methods of that particular organization. So always remember, no project should contradict the original ideologies of the organization, right? So if a question comes that something is contradicting the ideologies of the organization, always choose not to follow that option. Now that we have inputs and the targeted outputs, how can this be done? It can be done using the tools and techniques. So let's quickly understand what the tools we need for this process. Expert judgment. So this tool is going to get repeated a lot. So as I'm explaining it now, I may try to skip it later, considering the time again. So expert judgment. Remember that we are not currently talking about the development of the product. We are talking about developing a project charter. So here in this case, for this process, the expert judgment has to be taken for the business case. So, and the expert judgment has to be taken for the assumed benefits, the time plan. Usually what happens is an industry expert is consulted to verify whether our documents gathered as inputs are legit. Second tool could be data gathering. Data gathering involves brainstorming, lessons learned, bringing the internal experts together, in a group who has experience in working at this stage, before, of course, the product experts are also required here. Interpersonal team skills. We as a project manager has to manage the conflicts. We have to ensure multiple stakeholders involvement, managing the meetings, etc. I know, tough job. Meetings. In the meetings, the project manager has to drive the topic of discussion. He has to record the minutes of meeting, etc. So, clear with this process. Let's pace our learning in this method moving forward. I hope everybody is clear with the method. First, we learn the outputs, and then the inputs, and then the tools and techniques. So, if we apply this method, it is quite easy to learn each and every process. Okay, so let's move on. Developing project management plan. We have only one output to focus here, the project management plan. What does it mean? This is a consolidated document of all the partial management plans and all the partial important informations. So this basically describes how the project is going to be executed, monitored, controlled, and closed. So let's move to the inputs. Okay, the project charter. The document that we learned in the previous process, it's the same thing. So we need that here as an input. Okay, so there it was output. Here we need that as an input. Outputs from other processes. From the process table, the process group planning, you can recollect that there are 10 different knowledge-wise management plans. Starting from the scope management plan to the stakeholder engagement plan, there are totally 10 different knowledge-wise management plans. So we have to gather all of them as the input for this. And in addition to that, the other plans like project lifecycle, and the review mechanisms, etc. So all this has to be gathered as outputs from other processes. Enterprise environmental factors, I think we have covered it already, and organizational process assets, we have also covered earlier. So let's move to the tools that we need. Expert judgment. Here also we will be needing experts from the areas, but they are slightly different from the ones that we have used in the project charter, right? Someone who is expert in the topics like technical details, the process documents, the change control experts, or somebody who can identify the right stakeholders for the right job. Such experts are needed in this process. Data gathering, again, it is similar to the points that we learned earlier. Interpersonal and team skills, soft skills, that is covered. Meetings is also covered. Moving on, direct and manage project work. So this is something which is performed not just at one stage, but throughout the process. So mainly focused on execution part. The work involves collecting the work performance and supporting the controlling processes. When we say work performance, how the parts are being manufactured, how the employees are being performed. All this, everything comes under work performance data. So let's quickly see what the outputs are. Okay, deliverables. Deliverables, I think we have already learned this term before. These are usually the outcomes of the project. So it could be a product, it could be a service, it could be a result. We learned it before. Work performance data, the second point, as I just said before, this is to support the controlling processes. It usually involves data logs, the KPIs, the status of delivery, such things. Issue log. So this is something different. We all know what an issue is. So we learned how it is different from a risk, differences between risk and an issue. So this log will have all those current problems, but in a systematic way. This document format is also not important because every organization has its own format, but it should have all the important information in it. Like when I say important information, it could be the type of the issue, who is responsible to solve the issue, the target date of the resolution, or some information on the planned actions also, right? All this comes under this issue log. Change requests, also touched upon this topic before. In this document also, all the relevant data, like what is the change, what are the repairs done, since when it is effective, all such details must be there. Next thing is project management plan updates. The plan we made at the beginning is not the absolute plan, right? So chances are that there are changes happening to it. So they have to be recorded as we go on learning the processes. So every process may or may not have updates to these project managing plans. Similarly, project documents update. Again, what documents are we talking about here? The lessons learned register, the risk register, the assumptions log. So all these documents we have to update after the project or this process is executed. And finally, the organizational process asset updates if we are changing the methods of the company after this process. So we have to update that document also. Long list, right? Okay, quickly the inputs, the project management plan that acts as an input here, the project documents. Okay, here the set of documents, this can differ from the previous processes, right? All the project documents may not be required here. We can gather the data just by the use of lessons learned or risk register, etc. Approved change requests by the change control board, that is also important. Enterprise environmental factors, I think we have already covered this topic, and also the organizational process assets. All these act as inputs for this process. Let's have a look at the tools and techniques that we need. Again, the relevant experts' judgment is needed. So a special expert is consulted also to manage this project work. So that process is important for us. And PMIS, Project Management Information System. This is nothing but getting access to all those softwares and applications needed for the project. In your organization, you must have seen that some softwares have access to some people, and some softwares are not accessible to some people, right? So usually what happens is that these softwares and applications, they are licensed and they are for only limited users. So we as project manager has to control who is using them so that the cost will be within the limit. So it also talks about how we record the information in software. Next thing will be the meetings. I think meetings is quite self-explanatory. Moving on to the next process, that is the manage project knowledge. PMBOK guide talks about managing the knowledge in two ways. It divides the knowledge into two types. First type is the explicit knowledge, and second type is the tactic knowledge. Explicit knowledge is the knowledge that we have discussed so far about, that is any knowledge that can be recorded, right? Lessons learned, documentation, images, photographs, all these things are explicit knowledge. We can see it, we can learn it from a book, from a downloaded page, something like this. But tactic knowledge is something which can only be understood when you are personally involved and personally experienced it. It's kind of within the minds of those experts or in the experience, right? How can we explain this better? It's more like if we ask a question, same question, to two different persons from two different experiences, both of them will give the answer in their own point of view. So a designer and a tester, they will give two similar answers but not the same, because they have their own experiences which are linked to it. So, right? So this type of knowledge is called the tactic knowledge. So let's quickly look at what we should achieve here. The lessons learned register. I think we have lightly touched upon this before. This is nothing but the collection of outputs from the previous project. So everybody who's working on a project can contribute to this document, and they usually do. So it could be a common data collection or an independent one. So when I say common, it's like everybody is contributing to this data. They entering the lessons learned in one single document, everybody from different teams. When I said everybody, or every team will have its own lessons learned, and then it is integrated finally by the project manager. So this is a document which is usually reviewed also at phase gates, right? So this could be an important point for your exam. Where is it reviewed? So it is reviewed at a phase gate. Project management plan updates. So if the project plan changes during the activity, it has to be updated accordingly. So similarly, organizational process asset updates, updated likewise. Let's see the inputs. The project management plan as an input, of course, project documents. So here, what could the documents be? The lessons learned act as an input, project team assignments act as an input, the stakeholder register act as an input, and the resource breakdown structure. What does resource breakdown structure mean? It talks about categorizing the available resources based on the knowledge. Deliverables, the product, service, or a result. So what are the deliverables? They act as the input to the managed project knowledge. The enterprise environmental factors, I think we have covered. Organizational process assets, also a repeated input. The tools and techniques, expert judgment. Again, the relevant expert consultancy is needed. Managing the knowledge, how to manage. The project manager can be as creative as possible here in gathering the explicit knowledge, the tactical knowledge, as we have learned it. The information management, how is it different from the knowledge management? We have learned about knowledge management. So information management, it focuses on the how-to part, right? So how to record the lessons learned, what format to use, how to generate the common directory, how to share this information, should this be encrypted or not encrypted? All such things comes under information management. Interpersonal and team skills, soft skills, I would say. Remember the politics. Okay, the fifth process, monitor and control project work. Also done throughout the project. So it's not just at one particular stage. So let's see what is expected to bring out. So we have 4 outputs to be performed. Work performance reports. These things are updated accordingly. Change requests, I think we have covered what change requests actually mean. So they will become the outputs of this process. Project management plan updates, I consider understood. Also the project documents update. The inputs, have a look at the inputs. The project management plan, of course, again, repeated input, different project documents. So again, at this process, we take inputs from all major documents. So if I read out the list, starting from the assumptions log, the cost forecast, the issues log could be an input, lessons learned could be an input, quality reports could be input, schedule forecasts can be an input, risk reports can be input. So I did not show this on the screen because you don't have to memorize this. You just have to be aware of the fact that at monitor and control the project process, all the important relevant documents must be considered for inputs. Just don't leave anything. Work performance information, we use this as an input. Add the techniques, update as outputs. Agreements, also an important input. Enterprise environmental factor, see how important this is. Like almost all the processes that we have seen until now, they consider this enterprise environmental factors, external factors, internal factors who affect the performance of the organization. This is very, very important, right? So it is an input for each and every process so far. So a very important one. Also the organizational process assets, that is also a repeated input for the processes we have seen so far. All right, the tools, of course, the expert consultancy again. Second part is the data analysis. Okay, we need to know that there are 6 types of data analysis. So again, due to the time constraint that we have here, we cannot learn each analysis one by one, because that itself will form the lecture for 1 hour. But just know that there are 6 data analysis that is enough for the examination. So what are these? First thing is alternative analysis, cost benefit analysis, earned value analysis, root cause analysis, trend analysis, and variance analysis. So this session is recorded, so don't worry much about writing them down. What I'll do is that I'll describe these as detailed as possible in the lessons to come whenever they are needed. So because they're better explained when I explain it with those examples. The decision making is also something very interesting. The project manager uses voting, right? Voting as an option to understand the opinion of the group. So after the voting, the decisions are made based on the unanimity or majority or plurality, again, based on that organization's methods. Meetings, also a tool, and I consider that is understood. We have covered 5 processes. Moving on, perform integrated change control. The focus here is towards the change control, right? And how to consolidate all the change requests throughout the project. So this process is all about that. This is also done throughout the project. So not just at one phase or one stage, because the changes can occur at any stage of the project. So starting with the outputs, what we'll achieve through this process. We will have all the change requests approved. So again, don't take that statement to be absolute. When I say approved, what I actually mean is that we have to clear all the changes. So approved, not, we have to clear all the change requests. So the clearance here, it could mean you have approved the change requests, you have modified the change requests, or you might even have rejected some change requests. In all cases, the change requests need not be approved every time. So, and the project management plan needs to be updated along with the project documents. Okay, let's see what we have for inputs. To achieve these outputs, what inputs we need? The project management plan. Before this process begins, we will be needing the project plan, including all the scopes, schedules, costs, baseline. When I say baseline, it is approved. So without baseline, they are just the plan. After the approval, they are called baseline. Just keep this in mind. This is also an important term. Baseline is an important term. The project documents, it's also, I think, understood. The work performance reports and change requests. And again, the enterprise environmental factors, the organizational process assets. It keeps repeating, guys. So hope that's clear. Let's move to the tools and techniques. We will have to, again, consult the experts. And at this stage, what experts can help us? Legal experts, technical experts, risk management experts. So all those experts can help us perform integrated change control tools. Okay, again, something important here. These tools, they're not physical tools, but they could be manual or automated tools. The tools applied are going to be in both the deliverables, the tools for deliverables, and process tools. Data analysis. There are typically 2 types of analysis that we should know here. First thing is alternatives analysis. Something important here. So wherever I need I feel that there is a need for explanation, I'm slowing down. Alternative analysis focuses on what choices that we should choose in case of a solution to the problem. A problem might have two or three solutions, and we have to consider these as alternatives, and we have to analyze which one is the right one for us. So that's called the alternatives analysis. So that is one of the data analysis methods. And second one could be the cost benefit analysis. This focuses on whether the solution itself that we have selected, whether it is cost friendly or not, cost effective or not. Next thing is decision making. I think we have learned this, voting option and all. And finally, the meetings is also covered too. Moving on. Okay, the last process in this knowledge area, closing project or phase. Basically, the project manager has to ensure all the activities mentioned in the project management plan are achieved, right? So there will be direct questions from PMBOK guide in the PMP exam mentioned in the inputs and outputs from this process, right? So it's an important process, close project or phase. So please learn it with care. And let's see what we have here to achieve as outputs. Project document updates. Every other document from the project has to be closed except the lessons learned. Why except the lessons learned? The lessons learned register will continue to be live because it acts as an input to the benefits management plan. Benefits management plan is not important for the PMP, but just know that lessons learned register need not be closed in the closing project phase because it's a live document. It acts as a input for something else. Final product, service or result transition. I think this is also self-explanatory. Final report. Yeah, this is important. What does it contain? Final report contains firstly a description of summary of the project, right? So it has objectives versus deliverables. What objectives are we talking about? The scope objectives versus scope deliverables, the cost objectives versus cost deliverables, quality objects versus quality deliverables. So the final report again could have validation results. So it can have scheduled plan versus actual plan. So description of final product is also available here, right? And also the summary of risks that are associated with the product, right? When you're using a product, what risks are involved with it? That is also involved in the final product. Organizational process assets that has to be updated. And as mentioned before, just for the sake of repetition, they could include the project documents, support documents. They could include the phase closure documents. They could be lessons learned. So to achieve this, we have 8 inputs. I think most of them are already covered. I'll, however, go by the list. The project charter acts as an input. The project managing plan, the management plan acts as an input. The project documents, all of them are important here because we are at the closing stage. Remember, acceptance of deliverables from all the stakeholders, right? When we say stakeholders, they could be internal customers, external customers, acceptance from the sponsor, the one who is sponsoring the project, right? Business documentations act as an input. Agreements, we learned what agreements are between vendors and the customers, NDAs, right? So those agreements act as an input. The procurement documents, I think this is something we have not covered or talked about. We will talk about this in depth in the project procurement management. So for now, just know that we need to close or we need to use the procurement documentation in the closing phase. And finally, the organizational process assets. Right. What tools and techniques do we need? The expert judgment. We are at the closing stage, remember. So at this stage, what expert should we consult? So we should consult the audit experts. We should consult the legal experts. So these two experts we have to consult at this closing phase. Data analysis. Here, a different set of analysis techniques are used. First thing is document analysis. Document analysis is something which validates the documents. The next analysis could be regression analysis. Regression analysis, what does it mean? This is kind of a retrospection about what causes the variation, right? What causes the change, so that in the later or the future projects, we don't have to repeat the same mistake. Change is something which is unplanned, right? That means it was not planned well, it was not envisioned well. So in regression analysis, we will understand that better. Trend analysis. Trend is something which links everything to the timeline, right? So next thing is variance analysis. So data analysis is a big step. So variance analysis is to improve the metrics, right? So plan versus actual. Finally, the meetings also can be used as a tool for closing the phase or project. Okay, so I think with that said, we have finished the first knowledge area by closing the project or phase. So let's quickly jump into the next knowledge area, project scope management. Okay, the word scope here can refer to both the product scope and the project scope. So our focus should be on both areas, not just the project scope. The product scope is also important here. So just know that we have 6 of these processes in this knowledge area. So let's jump right in. Plan scope management. So this process is a component of project management plan. So you remember project management plan? Yeah. So let's see what will be our outputs after this activity. 2 outputs: scope management plan, requirements management plan. What is a scope management plan? Keep in mind that this is a planning document. So this document tells about what needs to be done, right? The actual work is not recorded here. This is just a plan of the scope. So it includes the process for preparing a project scope statement. So, and also it enables the WBS. WBS means the work breakdown structure. When we talk about requirements management plan, for the requirements we received from the customer, how to proceed with achieving and all, right? So that plan is created as a result of this plan scope management. So the requirements are not already done. The plan for the requirement management is created here. The stress is on the plan. So let's take the inputs. What do we have here? First, we have the project charter. We all know what it is. The project management plan, the overall complete plan of the project, that is the project management plan. The enterprise environmental factors, internal factors, external factors, and then also the organizational process assets. You can see the enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets being repeated over and over. What tools do we need to convert these inputs to outputs? The expert judgment again. See, expert judgment is also an important thing or important tool in each and every project or each and every process. So here we are going to consult the industry experts because we are planning the scope, and then the application area experts are also quite often consulted at this stage. Data analysis, again, different ways of collecting the requirements. What that analysis is done. Elaborating the product scope, the project scope elaboration. How to control the scope. These are the data analysis that we need at this stage. And also finally the meetings. Okay, moving on to the next process, collecting the requirements. This task will be more focused in decomposing the needs of the customer into the product requirements. So when we say requirements, we can define them as conditions or capabilities required to be present in a product that can satisfy the customer needs. So let's see what are we expected to bring out as outputs here. Okay, we have 2 outputs to be done. First thing is the requirement documentation, and second thing is the matrix of requirements or traceability matrix. The requirement documents. Now we cannot just say, for example, I want this wall to be painted, and that is the requirement. So that is not a clear statement. So what should be a clear statement? Should the wall be painted red? Should the wall be painted green? Should it be painted yellow? Or the requirement should it be painted partially? Should it be painted fully? So such expectations are to be added to the requirements using the documentation. Quite specific. Requirement documentation, that means requirements are quite clear. Traceability matrix. Traceability matrix is nothing but the track of all the requirements. In first output, we will be gathering all the requirements in written form, and secondly, we will be tracing them or tracking them against the time. So we have all the requirements pasted in an Excel sheet, and then a timeline is given, and the statuses are also given, whether the requirements have achieved, or how much time do we still need, what resources we should put to achieve these requirements. So that is the requirements traceability matrix. Inputs, I think all of them are here already discussed in the previous requirements. So I'll just read out the list. We have project charter as input. We have project management plan as input. We have project documents, business documents as input. We have agreements from all the parties as inputs. And also, finally, it goes without saying, enterprise environmental factors, organizational process assets also act as inputs for collecting our requirements. Tools. Again, the expert consultation. The expert here could be for doing the requirement analysis. The experts could be from the conflict management, and the requirements could be the experts to collect the requirements. Second thing is data gathering. We have learned how it is done. Data analysis. What kind of data analysis can be used here? Business plan analysis. or issue logs can be one data analysis. Policies, process flows, all this kind of data analysis is used as tools here. For decision making, we have already learned how the decisions are made using voting. There are other kinds of voting also here, like autocratic decision making. This is also, I think, something important in the exam point of view. Just keep it in the back of your mind that the decision making types, right? So first type would be autocratic decision making. What does autocratic decision making mean? It means that one person takes all the decisions. Such decision making type is called autocratic decision making. It might be an important point to note for the exam. And second type of decision making could be multi-criteria decision making. So what happens here is we establish the criteria, we understand the risk level, we estimate the total uncertainty, we evaluate the ideas. So that's all about decision making. Data representation, again, also a big topic. It can be represented as affinity diagrams. Large number of ideas can be grouped based on the categories. Mind mapping can be done. When we say mind mapping, all the ideas collected from the brainstorming meetings, they are again categorized or mapped, based on some commonalities, some differences, some unique ideas are also taken out. So all these things happen in data representation. I think interpersonal and team skills are understood. Context diagram. What does it mean? Context diagram depicts the product scope. It shows the business system and how the people will interact with it. How to explain it better? Do I have the pen? The context diagram is nothing but we have a business system, and with this business system, the people keep interacting with it. When I say interacting, let's take an example of a HR system. So HR management system, what happens when the HR needs a person to be hired? What they do, they have an internal job posting mechanism and also external job posting mechanism. So what happens in the internal job mechanism? The internal colleagues get notified first via emails and all. And in case of external hiring, the external recruitment agencies are hired, or sometimes even the HR directly hires the people. Right. So what is happening here is recruiting a person is the context here. So that is the company, and that is the main important activity that needs to be done. And it can be done in two ways, internal and external. So is represented in the form of a diagram. So you can imagine a circle in between, and then on the left we have the internal systems, on the right we have the external system. So how the people are interacting, how internal colleagues are interacting to get this internal job rotation, and how external agencies are interacting with the same circle for the external joining, like lateral entry and all. So last thing here, prototypes. We all know what prototypes is. For those who don't know, prototyping is a method to obtain the early feedback by manufacturing it in a non-conventional method. So that will act as a tool to collect the requirements. Because why is it important here? We are gathering the requirements of the product. So whether the requirements are actually achievable or not, we will only understand when we have a product in hand. So, and we cannot manufacture this product by using a full-on production line. So to understand whether these requirements are real or not, a prototype is made. So that is also a very important tool at this stage. Okay, I think it's clear for now. Moving on, defining scope. Defining scope is actually a repeated task. Why am I saying this as a repeated task? Because the collect requirements is, when we are at collect requirements process, it's too early to get the real number of requirements. So at this stage also, we already have final requirements. When this process is taken place, we already have final requirements. So this is kind of a repeated task. Let's see the inputs. When we are done with defining scope process, we will have two outputs, that is the project scope statement and the project document updates. I think we have not talked about project scope statement before. Let me refresh it. So what it contains is, it contains final product scope, it has final deliverables, and it has final acceptance criteria. Because again, as I said, it is a repetitive task. We are finalizing everything here. And it might also have the project exclusions, what are not included in the project. So that is all about the project scope statement. Let's talk about inputs. Are there any new inputs here? No. So all the inputs are also fresh. We have project charter, we have project management plan, we have project documents, all are understood. And of course, we have enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets. Let's see what tools we need to use in this process. Expert consultation, of course, expert judgment, data analysis needs to be done at this stage. Decision making is also done, by voting. Interpersonal and team skills is also done. Product analysis. We talked about data analysis until now, but what is product analysis? Product analysis is nothing but defining the products or results or services. It's all about examining techniques, right? So how do we test it, right? So it can involve like breaking down the product into smaller sub products, sub assemblies. The requirements analysis could be one technique. Systems engineering, right? So India lacks in system engineering, sadly, but in Europe and US, system engineers are more prominent. So the one who understands the performance of the complete system, not at a individual component level, but at a system level, how a product should perform. So this is the reason why India quite often consults with the Europeans or the Americans or the consultancy agencies for this system engineering technique, right? So that is done in the product analysis. The value analysis can be part of the product analysis. Value engineering, I think we know what value engineering is. Value engineering is nothing but understanding or again retrospecting whether we have an over design. Imagine a product is designed more than what it should work for, right? So in that case, we actually reduce the performance of this product. So that is called the value engineering. So all this comes under product analysis. So that is an important tool for defining the scope. Moving on to create WBS. I think I already mentioned you what WBS means. WBS is work breakdown structure. So this is also an important point for your exam. This is nothing but the process of subdividing the tasks and make it easier to manage. Expected outputs, scope baseline, and project document update. Project document update, I think it is all well known to us. Scope baseline. What is scope baseline? This is an approved version of scope statement. I think I already mentioned baseline means approval. So we have a scope plan, we have a scope baseline. That means approved scope plan. So in the scope baseline, we have an approved version of scope statement. And the components of this scope baseline could be the project scope statement, unapproved stage. We have the WBS, the work breakdown structure. The final work breakdown structure will be the result of this. The work package or the planning package. And also when I said WBS, we also have WBS dictionary. The dictionary contains, description of work, assumptions, or acceptance criteria, all those things. Okay, moving on to the inputs. What do we have for inputs? I think all these inputs are already known. We have project management plan, of course, project documents, and again, the repeated enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets. So I think by now you are already aware that how important these input number 3 and input number 4 are. Moving on to the tools. Again, we have expert judgment and decomposition. Okay, this is something new. What is decomposition? Decomposition is actually, I think, the definition of work breakdown structure. So there are some simple techniques to divide the tasks. When I keep saying techniques, don't worry about all these things because you don't know what these techniques are. It's nothing but you have a bigger work. You have divided into 3 parts. And then these 3 parts you have divided into 3 subparts again. So how do we divide it? It can be done phase wise. So that is one method, or it can be divided on work wise, right? Major deliverables, like example, testing. We have a huge testing task. We divide it into 2 small testings or 3 small testing works, right? So these are the decomposition techniques. You just remember that there are 2 of them, phase wise decomposition or major work wise or major deliverable wise decomposition. Moving on, validate the scope. Validating scope is nothing but we have to make sure that the deliverables are met. We have an acceptance from the customer and the other stakeholder, and that's important, right? You have to get an approval from sponsor also. Outputs is, of course, the accepted deliverables from the sponsor, from the customer, from all the relevant stakeholders. We need work performance information. I think we learned this before. We have change requests closure. All the change requests have to be closed, not approved. We have the project documents to be updated at the end of this process. What do we have for inputs? The project management plan, of course, the project documents, of course. What project documents could be acting as input here? You could use quality reports, you could use lessons learned, you could use requirements documentation. You can use all this as inputs in the project documents part. Of course, the verified deliverables act as an input here, and work performance data. I think we have covered all these inputs in the previous talks. Validating the scope, we have to inspect all these inputs, and inspection methods are to be learned. And the decision making, because to validate whether the deliverables have actually been met or not, the decision has to be done. And who has to take this decision, at what time this decision should be taken? Can this be taken at the beginning of the project? It cannot be, right? Because we have to actually validate these things. So first inspection and then the decision making. Who has to done it? When we have to do it? What is the frequency of these reviews? All these things come under the techniques of validating the scope. Control scope. Okay, so here it's nothing but making sure all the change requests or the actions that we have taken. When I say actions, it could be corrective actions, it could be preventive actions, whether all these things are processed or not, that we will understand. What do we have here for outputs? We have work performance information. We have learned that before. We have change requests as outputs. We have learned that before. We have project management plan updates. What project management plan diagrams or what documents can be updated here? You can imagine scope plan. You can imagine the scope baseline being updated after the process. The schedule baseline. Basically, all the baselines are updated after this task. And then moving on, we have project document updates. Again, what documents? If we speak, go to the specific, we have lessons learned to be updated. We have requirements documents to be updated. We have requirements traceability metrics to be updated. At this stage, we'll understand what is the status of each requirement. So the traceability matrix of the requirement also is updated at this stage. What do we have as inputs? Project management plan, of course. Again, when we keep on repeating project management plan, it is again a conglomeration, or it is a gathering of all the small management plans. Let's say scope management plan, requirement management plan. All these smaller management plans together, they act as inputs. The project documents, again, if you go to the specifics, we have lessons learned, requirements documentation. All these act as inputs to us. We have work performance data and organizational process assets. Okay, we have only one tool to discuss here, that is the data analysis. At this stage, control scope stage, we have two different data analysis methods. First thing is the variance analysis, and second thing is the trend analysis. As the session is recorded, you will understand these processes again. So you have hints for what to learn and what not to learn. So just know for control scope, we have two data analysis, variance analysis and trend analysis. When we say variance analysis, what it does, it compares the baseline versus actual, right? What is approved and what is right now, what is the actual result. So the effectiveness of this corrective action, preventive action, everything is done in this variance analysis. And when we talk about the trend analysis, I think we have already spoken about this trend analysis, but still I'll repeat it. It means we have to examine the project performance over the time, right? So at one point of time, what is this project performance, whether it is getting improved, whether it is getting deteriorated, right? So all these things come under this data analysis of controlling the scope.